Hey everybody. I'm joined by another guest, different guest this time. I'm joined by Marc Swint the Engineer, who those of you who have followed my shit online for a long time, he's voiced in a lot of my old cartoons back in the day. He does a lot of podcasting. He does a lot of behind the scenes stuff on That Guy with the Glasses, and built the Tone website. Hi Mark, thank you for joining.
Hi, everybody.
We're gonna be. I'm gonna tell you while we're still recording this. By the way, this is completely just like just completely natural. So that was the happiest I think I've ever heard you in my life. So you don't have to fake. You can be totally a cloud of evil reigning over the entire planet as you like, as you normally are.
Look, look,
Please go right ahead.
I'll post this on the wall right now. Is that when I'm greeting people for the first time on a new podcast, I'm always going to sound happy, and of course, I'm happy to be here. I'm genuinely happy to be a part. But when we get into the subject matter, that's when the evil comes out. So, in
Okay,
the
so
meantime,
we're gonna talk about Sonic the Hedgehog. So a lot of evil's gonna come out tonight. So we were talking earlier. I forget exactly how did it even come up. We were talking about Sonic Boom.
we were
Uh,
talking about character design and about how the silhouette theory, how you should always be able to recognize each character individually merely by their silhouette, and that's when
that's
Sonic
right.
Boom happened.
That's right. Because I mentioned how I liked that. I understood. Those of you who followed the Kirblog's before, I did one about just like on the day that the designs came out. I did a like my reaction to that because I felt it was hot enough of a topic that I should throw my 2 cents in. But I like what they're doing. I like the idea of what they're doing and trying to differentiate the character silhouettes more so to fit their personalities and whatnot. Mark had some different opinions on it, but from there we kind of went into like how the characters have been utilized and and particularly like the Archie stuff because like up until this point Archie I think has made like I think we're both on the same page about how the Archie comic has been the best use of like all of the characters as a whole for like story purposes. Um,
Yeah, they've kind of been towing the line in terms of, well, Sonic is what Sonic is, but over here in the States, Sonic is actually sort of like, I was going to say a big deal. No, Sonic is not a big deal. But instead it's that, like, oh, look, a story that you can actually follow with arcs and character development and characters that actually matter.
yeah, and on that same note, this is I think a subject I've been wanting to tackle for a while about like kind of the purpose of Sonic's friends in general. And I was thinking about this first point, and then I was like, oh, we should just do a curve blog about it. So from what I can understand, I might have even like written something about this and never posted or whatever. Is I've always determined that like the majority of Sonic friends, their purposes existed to serve a new gameplay element of some kind for whenever they've been, long before like there was, every Sonic thing in existence. And it was just the first couple of Genesis games. The characters, existed to serve a purpose in the gameplay. Going back to the beginning, it's like Tails. It's like, all right, we want to have a two-player co-op function. We want to have a character that can move as fast as Sonic but have some different abilities. And they gave him in a way you can almost say like Tails was like sort of the early kind of easy mode for like your little brother who would die a lot or whatever while they're playing the game with you or something. Amy was the character you were saving in Sonic CD. Metal Sonic was the rival that you were racing against. Knuckles was a totally different control scheme that could still work on the same engine and go through completely different pathways in the same level or whatever.
Well, just
Um,
to put a pin in that, I always kind of felt like Knuckles was the excuse to never leave anything on the cutting room floor in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. like the like you look at level design ideas, and you know that there are many level designs where it's like, you know what, this corridor, it's got to go, this building's got to go, this whole scrimmage, it's got to go. But with Knuckles, it was, you've got some really good ideas here that if we didn't have Knuckles, we'd just throw it away. But since we've got this guy who flies and climbs and breaks through walls, then yeah, we can just throw everything in the level. The Genesis can hack it totally.
Yeah, and see, it's funny because I mean, maybe you know more about this than I would on the history of it. But I don't know how the development went of Sonic 3 and Knuckles in terms of like if because obviously Knuckles wasn't playable until the second half. So I don't know if maybe that was something that they put in later and they never intended to make Knuckles playable when they were first designing 3. Um, but I mean, it ended up being really cool because then like the mechanics that they gave him with the gliding and climbing and stuff like was kind of interesting, and they since expanded upon that. And now he's the second Tails, as he's Sonic's other friend that travels around. Which is also part of why I'm excited about the way he's going to be in Sonic Boom, because I love Knuckles, I really do. He's one of my favorite characters, but I think that he needs to be more. He needs to have his own identity again, and he hasn't for a while. So
Yeah, well, after they co-opted the hip hop identity for him for a little bit, it's like, yeah, he's a guy who lives alone on an island, so his theme song is jazzy and R&B, and then it's rap. It's just straight rap.
I don't see. I don't even think that that necessarily like impacted his personality that much.
Well, it was like
Uh,
they just someone said, you know what, Vector the Crocodile, we're never going to use him again for anything ever.
well, see, okay, I haven't played Chaotix. Have you played Chaotix before?
Oh yeah, I was a big
Okay,
32X guy.
so were they like? I mean, I like those characters and all, but like, did they play differently? Were there any differences between them and the others at all, or what was the deal?
Well, Mighty the Armadillo, he was kind of like Knuckles light.
Okay.
Charmy was just Tails light. I mean, he was small and he could get in little places, but generally speaking, it was just a pain to play, especially when they stuck you with him because they put you in a roulette. So you would pick your character, and then they would force a partner on you through this little roulette. And whenever you got stuck with Charmy, and because there was a hit box that if you got it, then you would switch characters for a few minutes. So if you had to play Charmy, he was small and slow and couldn't really do anything. It was just all the worst parts of Tails. And Vector was just kind of Vector. He was, tall and lithe and ran around. And his idle animation was just him doing a little dance. So generally, there wasn't any like a large chasm between gameplay styles and all those characters. It was just kind of personality things that they never really went into all too often. But Vector was very clearly the hip hop guy.
And now he's a wisecracking gangster who sounds like Kermit the Frog.
I don't know where the computer room is, but when I find it, I'm going to burn it to the ground.
that one's my fault. All right, well, I guess past them, then I guess there's the adventure stuff, and like Sonic Adventure 1, in terms of the other characters that they added, like, and yes, let's talk about Big the Cat and Gamma for a second without like rolling our eyes or whatever. Like it's clear to me that Sonic Adventure was kind of an equivalent for Sega the way that Mario 64 was for Nintendo, where like we are doing something very different compared to any other game in this series before, because not only were they jumping to 3D, but they couldn't just literally do a 3D version of the way it was before. They had to work within, the limitations, especially Sonic, because it's like you couldn't like make a Sonic level in a 3D game at that time that was as long as one of the ones in the Genesis game, because just the system wouldn't be able to handle it. Now they can do that with the current ones. But back then, clearly they wanted to go in like a little bit more of an experimental direction, so they repurposed Tails and Knuckles a little bit. Sonic made sense for what he was doing. Amy was a little weird in that one. I don't entirely know what the hell was going on with that, with like her running away from Alpha.
The way that I kind of see it is that Sonic Adventure was first ride, no rules. So, because it really was, that Mario 64 moment where, while Mario 64 was comparatively safe, it was extremely safe by comparison, because it's like, look, it's Mario gameplay in 3D. Like, okay, great, stars, awesome. But
Well, I mean, an open world, like that was a totally new concept in terms of like playing a collecting game for a 3D
yeah,
system.
but at the same time, it was a whole lot of recycling. Like it was just like, how can we be as efficient as we can in designing this game? Well, let's make it open world, so that way you just plod through the same crap over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly doesn't hold up as much, but it was very revolutionary for its time, so
Yeah,
it's worth respecting. But yeah, so like Big and Gamma clearly were just for like, all right, let's just kind of throw a bunch of things at the dartboard. We can kind of take that risk with Sonic and like try a few different things. They carried over some of those elements for 2, in which case they're like, okay, like having Shadow and Rouge and then making Eggman playable was like, okay, we have the 3 different engines, and then we'll have the 2 different campaigns, and we'll have them run on the same corresponding character. And then Heroes, all the different characters in that, including the newer ones like the Chaotix being back in there for the first time, was having them be like, like different modes basically. Like Sonic Team was medium difficulty, Dark was hard, Team Rose was easy, and then like Chaotix was super hard because you had to like do missions and like find shit or whatever. Um, and then Rush I haven't played, so I don't know how Blaze fits in with that exactly.
But the the increasing cast list of Sonic characters is really something that I've been back and forth on with you multiple times in private conversations, where I just kind of say like, look, it's very clear what it is that they're doing. Since they don't have anyone who is capable of writing a story and developing characters properly, all they keep doing is just adding characters in order to fill that gap, that horrible chasm of crap. If you really look at Sonic under a microscope, there's nothing going on with him at all. It's just sometimes he's a jerk and sometimes he's not, but he always does the right thing. And meanwhile, you know, Archie has been producing this story forever that we both grew up with, and that, you know, like fell off from for a while and then got back on, and then eventually like I just kind of left it behind. Like I heard the news that Ian Flynn was going to fix it, and then I went, yeah, no, he's the man to fix it, but I'm not going to read it because I can't stand that whole, you know, like when your book when your story is entirely dependent on one person, when they leave, the entire thing falls off. And yes, you always have those memories of like, oh, I remember this issue, and I remember when this thing happened. I remember when Sally died in quotations.
You know, it's interesting because that kind of was gonna that perfectly leads into the next point I was gonna make. The thing that I defend about the characters with you know, being in games like half and half is that what I've kind of found is that look, I grew up with the same kind of Sonic stuff that you did, and I have been used to seeing stuff where like cool stories and interesting like universe lore, you know, has happened with Sonic stuff before. Excuse me, and I think that it's definitely possible to do that, and Archie has continued to do that for a long time. Um, but the other thing that I've also determined, especially since like '06 or so, and even some of the ones before that, is that the less characters there are in a Sonic game, especially the ones like less characters that are playable, the better that the Sonic game in a traditional sense tends to be. And also by having a lesser amount of characters, especially his friends, um, it tends to be a lot less convoluted. Because the thing is too, like when you're designing a game, is you have to think of it as a game first and foremost. There's a lot of modern games that are thinking in terms of like, we're just gonna make it a movie that you press the control stick and a couple buttons to progress, which is debatable on if that's a valuable type of game design or not. But with Sonic, like I think that as many different types of things that people think about Sonic, it's about playing a fun game more so than whatever the characters are doing or whatever the story is. Like, this is just kind of how it is. Like, so for a lot of times, especially back in the day, the story was just kind of tacked on, which is why Tails is not the, like, you know, the guardian of the emeralds or whatever like they originally thought at one point, because it just didn't work for the game itself. But I think that having stuff like the Archie comic and having something like Sonic Boom, granted it's going to be more of a comedy than like an overarching plot or whatever, but those are the type of mediums that I think fit having a large cast, because when you have like, you know, 22 or 11 minutes to tell a story in a TV show, or you know 18 pages every month to tell a story in a comic, you have much more room to do something with, and it's what you're entirely focusing on is the story and characters, and not am I having fun while playing this video game or not. So
Yeah, and that's, you know, that's I've heard that argument before. Well, whether or not QuickTime events entirely make up an entire game in terms of game design, you know, with Wrath and with the new game that had Ellen Page in it. But the theory holds true in the sense that Generations really is just Sonic. That's it. That's all you do. That's all you play. And I've never really given it much thought as to whether or not I'm playing a Sonic game just to play a Sonic. But when that game came out, I said, yeah, that's the truth. Is that I'm playing a Sonic game just to play a Sonic. I don't care about his friends anymore. I don't care about Tails. Tails isn't someone I identify with anymore. Knuckles I really don't care about. He's not cool anymore. Rouge is really interesting in terms of trying to round out Knuckles as a character and give him a kind of sort of love interest, but not.
well, not even anymore, because now they kind of stop with that at this point. Well, we'll see. What's cool about Generations too, to kind of add on to that, is like, see, when I first played Generations, I'm kind of back and forth with this, but maybe I don't know what your thoughts will be. with Generations was a very simplistic story. It's a really fun game. I will defend it against anybody who thinks that there's something wrong. That was a good game. It was a lot of fun. I willingly played through the whole thing 100% twice. And I think that the strength of it was the fact that it was the gameplay and making it just fun to play was put at the forefront. One side of me was saying, man, the story and the concept of this would have been so cool if they had expanded it, if they had done more cutscenes, if they had, delved a little deeper into like where the time meter came from or whatever, or even just like more cutscenes with like, like what is it, the thing when Sonic and Tails are in what is it, chemical plant, and Tails makes the joke about that pink water makes me really nervous. I'm like, I get it, like even just seeing more stuff like that. But I think that there was a lot more value to just having it be Sonic, Tails and their past equivalents versus the two Eggmans, going through that whole story. And they, and they meet the others for a little bit and they make a comment or two and there's a little joke in there. It's like, that's fine. I like, we can imagine a more perfect world where there would have been like an expanded story or whatever, but I don't think that the game was at fault in any way, shape, or form for not going that route and focusing mainly on just having the game be fun.
Yeah, and there's something that we're missing, is that a lot of games aren't focused on being fun anymore. They're really just kind of focused on being themselves, which, granted, that's good advice for a kid, like you should always just be yourself, but for a game it doesn't really hold up all too well, where the game is just kind of existing for its own sake, regardless of what anybody really says about it. So
it has to be entertaining.
yeah,
Like a game is just, it's purely entertainment more so than it is art. So
yeah, and I would like for a game to strike the balance of that. Like I always used to kind of hang on to the fact that when I played Epic Mickey, there was nothing epic about that game, but it was a game that was centrally focused on being good. And I could really appreciate that. Like, no, it didn't look the best, it didn't play necessarily the best, but it had something that engaged you, like a mechanic that worked well enough for the span of two games. But there's
special guest Miles the cat, by the way.
yes, fantastic. That's right. Have your pet spayed or neutered. So the thing about games focusing on being good is that when a game is focused on being good, then I can focus on how good the game is. But when the game is really just up its own ass, and I've seen a few games that are really up their own ass, turtleneck beret coffee house crap. It's like it's
Right.
it doesn't make for a really great game, where I'd rather a story progress than just kind of stagnate and explain everything to me. Like, yes, of course I want there to be a depth of field in storytelling, absolutely, but there's a point when you just kind of grind everything to a halt, and it's like, I really just kind of want to know what the next thing that happens is. And I'd like to know what that means for Sonic, in the same way that I'd like to know what that means for Metroid. But that's never going to happen for Metroid, so I guess I just have to stick with Sonic.
Well, that'll be another, Metroid will be another episode.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the best balances, I acknowledge that the adventure games don't hold up that great either. Like with Mario 64, that same point. I think that Adventure 2 had a pretty good balance in terms of like, the mix up of how the different levels were going between the three engines of characters was set up in like an aesthetically pleasing enough way. The story was simple but like in depth enough for me to be interested in keeping with it, and I liked the idea of having the two different campaigns and seeing the different perspectives and whatnot. And you like Adventure 2 too, right?
Yeah, Adventure 2 was the last, for me, it was the last good Sonic game before Generations happened, because everything. I'm always kind of split focus on Adventure 2, because my thing was Adventure 2 was great, but it introduced the worst thing that happened to Sonic ever, which was Shadow.
Yeah, and well, you know what? I will say, and just to briefly defend him too, I think that now that Shadow is past the point of like the who am I shit, and now he's defined as like, he's Sonic's rival once in a while. He's grumpy. He works for the government. His equivalent to Tails and Knuckles are Rouge and Omega. I think that where he is right now, where he has been since basically '06, not to give that game too much credit, but since that game, he's been pretty defined enough as a character to where I don't think that he overstays his welcome. It was when they were like, oh, people are so interested in what his whole backstory and his deal with is or whatever. They're past that. Like once they did Shadow the Hedgehog or whatever, they're past that shit. So now it's just like
that game.
he is who he is. He's there. He's whatever, and I'm like, okay, I can live with him. It's fine. So I don't mind Shadow too much at this point. But
Well, the last, I guess the last thing that I want to kind of bring up was in relative to Shadow the Hedgehog is the fact that Shadow happened at a time. Well, first off, Sonic exists in a space where he has very little competition these days. Like it's, and the problem is that that lack of competition has made for very bad games in the interim. But like platformers are all but gone at this point. Like Crash, who's heard of Crash anymore? These kids today, they don't know anything about Bandicoot. They don't know Booyah, Grandma Booyah. Um, so and Ratchet's holding on, but Jack never made it. And I always blame Shadow on Jack 2 because I mean Jack 2 was a brilliant game, but it set a standard which never should have been set, which is like, look at this cute character. Now we're making him hardcore. He's angry. He's Dark Jack. He's screwing up everything. Like he just took it to Clancy Brown. And so and I'm glad that Shadow has a place now where I don't have to
yeah,
deal with his emo crap anymore necessarily. But he was kind of the signpost of things to come, where it's okay. Here's Shadow. Well, Shadow kind of works with this current culture, stupid emo kids. So let's just give him more of that. So screw it. Let's give him cream and cheese and everybody else.
think about the Mario equivalents. Like the spin-off games are where those are the places for characters like Daisy and Waluigi and whatever, and having some of the other characters that are like usually enemies or otherwise be playable. I think that the stuff like Sonic Riders or like the Mario and Sonic Olympic stuff, having a place like that where you need a variation, you need a big cast to serve a purpose. I think that they fit there. And also, I think that for because I'm going to assume that the other characters are going to get Sonic Boom redesigns and will probably be integrated into the show or the game at some point down the line, like when appropriate. In which case, I think that like again, that's a medium that works to have them be expanded upon in terms of developing them and doing something fun and interesting with them, as opposed to trying to do a game where you have like let's have as many playable characters as possible, etc. And then even from a gameplay perspective, Sonic Boom, again, I'm not trying to hype myself up too much for the game. The show I'm hyping myself up for because it looks funny. The game I'm being hesitant for, but having former Naughty Dog staff sounds pretty cool, sounds pretty legit. And I think that putting focus on it's designed to be multiplayer from the ground up with the 4 different characters. They all have defined enough and close enough, of an engine together with their different abilities and stuff, and like they can all move the same speed with the some sort of like energy thing that they use to like move around or whatever. I think that it's being set up in a good place that's going to benefit everybody and will make use of the characters in a way that like we've probably been wanting for a long time, but just they haven't quite been able to find the right way to do that, and this might be a good opportunity to finally do that. So
Yeah, I think that my opinion is just see, like, I'll believe it when I see it.
yeah, and that's most people hesitant of the Sonic cycle would probably agree with you.
Seriously, but if they were to redesign Shadow and make him look like he either shops exclusively at Hot Topic or at a Harley Davidson store, I would die laughing, but I would most certainly respect the choice. Like, you know what? That's funny. Why not?
Well, thank you for joining me. Do you want to plug anything or link anything I can put here?
Just, you can follow me on Twitter at th3engineer.
The engineer. I'll have a link in the description too, which you won't read because you're watching this on YouTube. Um, yeah. What do you think of Sonic the Hedgehog's friends? Who's your favorite? Who do you want to see given more attention? Who do you think should be redone a little bit for Sonic Boom? Maybe. Who are you excited to see in Sonic Boom at all? Let me know in the comments, and if you got ideas for future Kirblogs, leave a comment about that too, or hit me up on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, the usual. And if you're on this channel, go check out. I just put out tome short number 2, The Traveler's Guide. You can click this annotation and go check that out. And yeah, that'll do it. So Mark, thank you for joining me again, and I will see you guys all later.